Voice of the Sea, learning from experts across the ocean. Welcome to Voice of the Sea. In this episode, we're at the Gump Research Station on the island of Moorea, talking with Stella Swanson about the importance of algae-eating animals on coral reefs. Stella explains how animals like sea urchins and herbivorous fish help control algae populations, keeping reefs healthy even through periods of natural disaster such as hurricanes. She also talks about other reef systems, like those in the Caribbean, which have been unable to recover from massive sea urchin die-offs.
So in the 1980s, in the Caribbean, there were a really high population of this one black spine sea urchin called the long spine sea urchin, diadema. And at one point there was this pathogen that is still unidentified to this day that we think is a waterborne pathogen that came through and ended up decimating the population. So like 99% of those sea urchins died.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, over the course of just a few years. It was really devastating. And nobody really, I think everybody at that time was interested in the role of sea urchins, and everybody was really thinking that they probably were playing an important role, but we really didn't understand how important they are until after that. In the Caribbean, there was a lot of fishing pressure for many years. So a lot of the fish that were eating algae or seaweed at that time had already been fished out for a long time. So when the diadema died off, they were basically kind of the last remaining herbivore that was controlling the algal community. So when diadema populations really crashed, and this was a Caribbean-wide thing, it was really impressive. It went through thousands and thousands of kilometers of the Caribbean basin, and so all of the coral reefs were really affected one at a time. There was a kind of a sequence of mortality events that went through, and after the sea urchins died, there was a lot of algal growth that happened really quickly. So seaweed just kind of quickly took over. Algae is a great competitor with coral because coral grows very slowly, and it ended up resulting in basically a seaweed forest. There was just tons and tons of seaweed, and it still is that way until now. There's still a lot more seaweed there than there used to be historically, so the coral reefs are really degraded. I study sea urchins here in Moorea, and I did my master's work here, and I was studying just the role of a bunch of different species of sea urchins. So there are 5 species of sea urchins in Moorea, and there are a variety of ways that they can influence the coral reef. And about a year and a half ago, I was here doing some of my normal research, and everybody kept coming to me saying, Stella, you study sea urchins. I noticed a lot of dead sea urchins out there today. And then, then I thought, oh, well, that's weird. Maybe there were a lot of big waves during that time of year. I thought maybe they were getting dislodged from their hiding places. And then when other researchers went around to other sides of the island and certain areas where there were really high densities of urchins in the past, they were like, this is crazy, Stella. This is really reminiscent of what we saw in the Caribbean. So I quickly had to think of a research plan. How am I going to quantify what's happening here? How will I estimate, the loss of the population? There were tons and tons of urchins in some areas before, and I wanted to see what the population was and then what it would end up being, and if there was going to be a response by the algal community. So if the algae was going to really take over, I wanted to be able to capture that. So what I did is I went out at a variety of sites along the north and eastern shore, and I sought out to capture the benthic community, basically. What is it now? The urchins are dying, and what might it be a year from now? What I have here is a few photographs of the density of sea urchins before they died off. So this is at Taimai on the eastern side of the island, and this species of urchin, diadema, is really closely related to the diadema in the Caribbean.
Oh.
And you can see that there are these aggregations, really high density aggregations.
There are a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Tons of them. There were thousands. Everywhere you swim, if you're not careful, you could really crash a knee or leg into them. Every time I tell people I work with sea urchins, they say, oh, my one experience with sea urchins is I was surfing or I was swimming and I bumped my leg into them, I stepped on them. So, but these high density aggregations like that were really common for a long time. So as long as I've been working here, about 7 years or so, they've been really dense like that.
Is it normal for them to just be scattered on the bottom like that in the daytime? I mean, normally when I think of sea urchins, I think of them hiding in the cracks and crevices, and the video I've seen of them moving around is mostly at night.
So these sea urchins normally are hiding, but when they get into these high density populations, they basically run out of space to hide. So they form these kind of aggregations as a defense mechanism from, we think, predators. They're probably, you know, strength in numbers, safety in numbers. So they hide around the base of this structure, these patch reefs, and that's the best protection that they have. But, you know, there were so many of them there that their populations were pretty stable for a really long time, even though they were out in the open.
So it's natural for there to be this abundance of a population?
Well, we don't really know. So there are some researchers who were working in the Caribbean at the time of the diadema die-off there. Some of them suggested that it was a lack of predators that was resulting in these really high populations, because if there aren't predators there to eat the sea urchins, then the sea urchin population can grow and grow and grow.
Who eats the urchins?
Big fish. There are triggerfish are probably the most common predators, and there are some really huge triggerfish around. Lobsters eat sea urchin. That's a little bit more in the kind of colder waters. We don't have a whole lot of lobsters here, and I don't know how good of sea urchin predators they are, but big fish. And there are big fish around here too that will definitely take them out. So this is my study site, and this is what it looked like before the sea urchins died. And then this is basically what it looked like after the sea urchins died. And that's what we saw when we were out there snorkeling around, that you just don't see them anywhere. There are none. Even if you look and look and look, you might see a tiny baby one every now and then. So the population was decimated.
We didn't see a single one, a single of the long spine urchins.
No, we didn't see any. So we saw another species of urchin, which, you know, may or may not be impacted by this. If they were competing for food with diadema, then their populations might increase. So that's something that we're also trying to determine how that changes. So out at this research site, we have all these patch reefs that we're trying to estimate the benthic community on. So we go out on a every 6-month basis, and we basically put down a big square quadrat, and we count the percentage of that square that is comprised of all the different things that are possible. So algal turf, the really fine turf algae that grows just on freshly dead coral. There's macroalgae, so the large algae that you think of when you think about seaweed. Coral, which is the beautiful, brightly colored, important habitat for fish and everything like that. Crustose coralline algae, which is another type of algae, but it's very beautiful pink, kind of soft crust. So we quantify how much of the benthic community is comprised of all these different things, and then go back the next 6 months or the next year and determine if that has changed at all for these same patch reefs.
Are you looking at the moving organisms also, like quantifying fish or anything like that?
Yeah, so we're putting out GoPro cameras as well on these same patch reefs, and we put them out for as many hours as we can, and then take them back into the lab, and we'll analyze those in the lab for the herbivorous fish that come through. So this way we can kind of get an estimation of the pressure that fish are putting on the algae. So we think that if the sea urchins were playing an important role, that either the algae is going to take over now that they're gone, or the fish are going to compensate. And so far we think that the fish may be compensating.
The University of Hawaii's Sea Grant College program focused on Hawaii's coasts and its communities through sustainable development, safe seafood supply, sustainable coastal tourism, hazard resilience, and healthy coastal ecosystems. Hawaii's Sea Grant.
Sea Island Earth, bringing together university, government, research, and community partners to improve science education and ocean stewardship in Hawaii.
You're watching Voice of the Sea. Welcome back. We're with researcher Stella Swanson, learning about reef ecosystems in Moorea and the importance of healthy, algae-eating fish populations to the recovery of reefs after traumatic events.
So I can show you here a video from out recently when we were out there, and all of these blackfish that you see are herbivorous fish, and there's the parrotfish back there, and we're just waiting and watching this bare space here for the length of the video to see how many bites they're taking. And with that, we can get an idea on how much fish pressure there is on the algae and whether we think they're going to do a good job controlling the algal growth. So we do think that they're going to do a pretty good job controlling the algae. So far, there hasn't really been any increase in algae, so that's a really promising sign. And with what happened in the Caribbean, there was a really, really quick response to the loss of the sea urchins. So the fish were clearly not capable of controlling the algal growth. So within a few days, there was a doubling of the biomass of the turfing algae.
Wow.
So the really fine algae just coating the reef. But within 3 months, there was a big drastic increase in macroalgae, or seaweed, that was covering the reef. And a year later, it was basically dominated by algae.
And you've been studying this site for a year and a half, you said? Mm-hmm. And you haven't seen an overgrowth of algae kind of in any way?
No, not at all. It seems to be exactly the same proportion of algae and coral and crustose coral and algae. So it seems like the fish are really doing a great job. So our next question, we think, okay, there probably won't be a big phase shift to algal dominance. Mm-hmm. This coral reef hopefully will stay a coral reef. And our next question is, will the fish change in abundance? They have presumably an added food source. We think that there's probably more algae available for them to eat because the urchins are no longer competing so much with them. And they might increase. There might be more fish out there. There might be more fish that can be supported on that same food source. Or the fish might get larger, which is really interesting as well.
Exploring Our Fluid Earth is the dynamic curriculum developed by the University of Hawaii's Curriculum Research and Development Group. The award-winning Fluid Earth and Living Ocean textbooks are now interactive and online. New activities, updated content, and a teacher community. Exploring Our Fluid Earth is now freely available. Find out more at exploringourfluidearth.org. Welcome back to Voice of the Sea. We've been learning about the long-spined sea urchin known as diadema and its importance in controlling algae growth on coral reefs. Researcher Stella Swanson shows us what healthy diadema populations look like and also what happens as disease starts to spread.
So here you can see the basically piles and piles of sea urchin spines. So there were oftentimes it was like a little ring of spines that you would find and the broken up bits of the sea urchin test. Just thousands of spines. So you can see parts of the feeding structure here, part of the mouth. There's a tooth inside this. This is kind of just the base of one of those patch reefs around the bottom, and it's just piles of sea urchin spines. So by the time I was out here quantifying the mortality of these sea urchins, most of them were dead at that point. So there were, I would find maybe one really sick, weird-looking sea urchin every now and then when I was swimming around trying to estimate how many of them were dying and what was happening and what the benthic community looked like. So it was pretty dramatic, yeah. This is often what I was finding, what people were finding when at the time where they were saying, Stella, there's a lot of dead sea urchins. It's really weird. I don't know why they would all be, dying. Uh-huh. And basically, you could see that it essentially looks like it rotted around the mouth on the bottom of the sea urchin. It got flipped over by a fish and everything was eaten out of it.
Can you show me a healthy one, like what it's supposed to look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So a healthy one of these sea urchins would look like this. They're really tightly aggregated against the base of the patch reef, and healthy kind of coloration, black with this iridescent blue, and their spines are all very firm and sticking out. A lot of them, when they were dying, their spines were kind of clumping together, or you could just see they were spazzing out their spines a little bit, doing kind of weird. But they're all hiding to some degree. Even if it's hiding within this aggregation, they're all in a pile together, hoping to hide from predators.
And then the mouth parts, do you have a picture of the underneath, what it would look like healthy?
This one's actually not. This one's showing kind of early signs. So I was trying to rate the degree of illness, or the degree of the mortality, and you can see little white areas here, and those are kind of lesions starting off. So this is early on. Around the Aristotle's lantern, or the mouth structure, it still looks quite healthy. This tissue essentially was the first that would go. Once it had completely died, this tissue would just totally rot out, and that Aristotle's lantern, or the feeding structure, would just fall out of the test. There's some more of these lesions where the spines are falling off and the tissue is sloughing.
So your suspicion is like a bacteria or a virus or something of that nature?
I think probably yes, but I don't really know. Because I work with a big research group that's interested in these coral reefs over a long period of time, we also have data sets that are really valuable that are ongoing. So we can look at, maybe there was some sudden increase in water temperature. We have some kind of nutrient samples that are taken on a yearly basis, so we can potentially look at the nutrient community if that had changed or anything like that. So we have a large data set to draw from, and at this point it's basically kind of detective work, trying to figure out maybe what may have changed around that time and see if there's anything that we can piece together to find out what's going on. There are a lot of things that I think that locals can, and all of us can, take from this kind of situation. Just our impact on the herbivores can really be important. So there are urchin fishermen here, and they tend to be fishing pretty sustainably, in my opinion. I think that they are very smart about harvesting only certain times of year, and a lot of them are very selective. They only choose, the very large sea urchins, and they only take what they need to sell and support their families. So kind of sustainable fishing like that is really important. And then also the fishing for fish predators is really important. And fish herbivores, I think a lot of cultures don't really take into account the role of an individual fish that is really great to eat and what role it plays in the ecosystem. So we know that herbivorous fish are really important. They eat the seaweed, and it's really important for them to be around. So, perhaps take a little bit fewer, or choose a size of fish. Maybe don't take the very largest fish, because that one might be providing the most reproduction to the ecosystem, or don't take the really tiny ones because they haven't had the chance to reproduce yet. But the fishermen, can certainly have an impact, because at this point in Tahiti, I think most people are doing well enough. There's not a really desperate poverty, so I think a lot of fishermen are not taking tons and tons more than they need just so that they can sell them and make more money. One of the things that we're interested in finding out is if certain fish maybe are kind of taking up the slack. So we know that there are a variety of herbivorous fish here, but maybe we'll find out when we watch these videos that it seems to be one fish that's really playing the most important role. And if that is the case, there is potential that we can talk to local people, and the fishermen can take that into account and say, well, that one type of fish is really delicious to eat, but there's 10 others, and that one seems to be really important, so maybe we'll take fewer of that one.
Is there any kind of rehabilitation that you can do or are planning to do to help bring the urchin population back?
Not really. As an ecologist, we tend to be concerned about that kind of our role in changing the ecosystem. So I think that if the sea urchins, there are small juveniles around of this species of urchin, and so if they can reproduce and they are successful, if the predators aren't too intense for them there, they will probably come back to some degree, but I don't really know whether they're going to come back into those large populations that they used to be. And I also don't really know if historically that is what it used to be like. I know, on a kind of decadal scale, based on my conversations with fishermen and some local people, But I don't know if, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, that may not be so common. There's been fishermen here for many, many years, and it's possible that the fish predators were a lot greater at that. There were bigger fish and a lot more predators around back then that were controlling these populations, and now this is unnatural. We don't really know for sure. I like working here in Moorea particularly because it's a really interesting ecosystem, because there are these disturbances that come through very often, and it's a reef that has the potential to recover. So there are a lot of things I think that are really unique about working here and about the sea urchins here, because that's what I'm mostly interested in. And there's a lot of things that we don't really know about a reef that recovers versus a reef that does not recover when it's disturbed. So to me, the most interesting thing is just basically what we can learn, and I think there's a ton that we can learn. There's a lot of things that we don't know about sea urchins from my perspective, and a lot of other things.
And why sea urchins? What do you love about sea urchins?
Well, from kind of a practical perspective, they're really easy to study. So they stay put during the day, which is fantastic. I can count them. They're not moving anywhere. They're not biting or doing anything weird. I think that they are also just very beautiful. They're really interesting to look at, and for me, I like to study things that are very different from me. I studied physiology when I was an undergraduate in school, and I remember thinking it was really interesting to learn about the body, and I find it, studying fish, I feel like the physiology of a fish is kind of similar to ours in some ways, but an invertebrate, like a sea urchin, is so weird and so bizarre, and I just find them really fascinating because they're so different from anything that I know. Most people I talk to do not have a good experience with sea urchins, but I show them really beautiful photographs of them, and I talk to them about their importance on coral reefs, and I think people gain a little bit of different perspective from what they thought.
Stella's research shows that the diadema urchin is still absent 2.5 years after she began her study. But Stella is excited to report that the coral in the Temay area and the other reefs most affected on the island of Moorea are still healthy. There appears to be adequate populations of important algae-eating fish that are helping to fill the ecological role of the diadema urchin and keep the reefs healthy. Thanks for watching Voice of the Sea.
The Curriculum Research and Development Group in the College of Education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. CRDG's training roots go back over 40 years. Through professional development programs, curriculum workshops, research on teaching methodology, individualized school and district training, and so much more. The Curriculum Research and Development Group, improving schools, improving education. CRDG.
Turn your love of the ocean into a lifelong career. Join NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, as we unlock the secrets in the deep oceans, track rapidly moving storms, model climate trends, protect and preserve our marine resources, and so much more. It's all in a day's work at NOAA. Find a career that makes a world of difference, enriching life through science, service, and stewardship. NOAA.
Healthy oceans are critical to our cultural, economic, and environmental sustainability in Hawaii. The ocean serves as a source of water, food, medicine, jobs, transportation, recreation, and energy. It controls climate and weather. Kosi Island Earth aims to share this ocean awareness by partnering with local scientists and educators to engage communities and schools in active science learning for an ocean-literate population. Kosi Island Earth is working to establish new avenues for connecting research scientists with educators and communities. Kosi Island Earth is enhancing the science and ocean literacy of our island residents and visitors. Kosi Island Earth is connecting scientific research, traditional knowledge, and ocean policy. Kosi Island Earth, bringing together university, government, research, and community partners to improve science education and ocean stewardship in Hawaii.